Good evening. I'm Rod Miller. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Berks County Patriots.
I'm State Senator Mike Falmer, and I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad to see the turnout this evening on this very, very important issue. I realize that this bill has been a long time coming. I realize that people are wondering why haven't we been doing it sooner. It's because it's a process that you have to go through, unfortunately. This is the right thing to do. This is the right bill to do. I'm back of it 110%. And the main reason I am, and if you just bear with me here, let me just read you this. This is Article 1, Section 1 of our state constitution. And this is what it says. It says, all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent and indefeasible rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property and reputation, and of course the pursuing of their own happiness. How can you protect your reputation? How can you possess your property if you are going to be thrown out of your property of no fault of your own because you cannot afford the egregious overbearing property taxes that so many Pennsylvanians are faced with today? So I think it's not only a constitutional issue, also I think it's a very good business issue. This bill goes a long way in helping make Pennsylvania not just these KOZ zones that we have where we pick winners and losers of what industries we're going to give tax breaks to. It's going to make the whole state a KOZ. We'll be open for business, get those jobs in Pennsylvania where they belong, and move forward. So I'm with this bill 110%. The experts are here down the road. They know all the details. I'm supporting it to the end. So there's where I'm at.
My name's Joel Sears. I'm from York County. Head up a little group called the York County Taxpayers Council. I'm also one of the leaders in the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations and a recently elected school board member in the York Suburban School District. I've been involved with David in particular since 2004 with the introduction of the first plan for Pennsylvania's future that was done under Sam Rohr's sponsorship, and it's grown to what we see today. One of the things I'd like to mention about this legislation and the predecessor legislation is that unlike the tricks that have been dangled over the last 6, 7, 10, 12 years under the guise of property tax reform, the legislation that we're talking about now and the predecessor bills that were sponsored along that same line are all real, enforceable, enactable legislation. They're not tricks. There's no smoke and mirrors to it. That's why it's taken so long for this to be brought to the public eye. It had to pass scrutiny. It has to be enforceable. It's not just a feel-good piece of legislation. It's extremely detailed, and when Jim gets here, he can talk about the agonizing process that it takes to actually take an idea like this and bring it to the point that you have a mature piece of legislation that can be enacted and enforced such that we get virtually immediate benefit. We're not talking about the gambling reform that's given us so much benefit. Don't know about you all, but I think we're going to get about $150 this year. Is that enough for us to adjourn the meeting? I doubt it. What Mike said earlier about economic development is another aspect of this, which really takes a dimension that goes far beyond the immediate impact on our wallets when we talk about school property tax elimination. As a school board member, I feel it coming from both directions. You're all familiar with Act 1, I think. Hands? You know what that's all about? The old days of school boards having the unlimited power of increasing our taxes are gone, for the most part. Now, there's still some exceptions. There are still cases around the state where the tax increases are double digit. How that can happen is beyond me. In our case, the index is 1.7%. We elected, because there are a couple of conservatives on the board who were just recently elected, we decided we would not take exceptions. We're limited to 1.7%. We're in a small district. We're projecting a $1.4 million deficit this year and a $7 million deficit 4 years from now due to pension contributions. If we can't get this funding formula and this taxation straight, it won't matter any longer that we get together and we oppose these bills. We have got to do something to turn the economic strength of the state around. Mike talked about the industrial impact. It's phenomenal. 1776 talks about a shift. Let's be honest about it. We want to get rid of our school property taxes, and we're willing to pay a little bit more income tax and a little bit more sales tax to make that happen. You all understand that? And does that make sense? Is that a compelling argument? Here's what we're hearing from the Republican whip, who happens to be a York County representative. Well, gosh, that would hurt people that are getting haircuts. They don't want to pay sales tax on haircuts. Can you imagine that? This is from the third highest ranking Republican in the state house. And that's a legitimate cause for concern. We don't want to pay. Now, how much do you all pay for haircuts? 20 bucks? How about an extra $1.40 so you don't have to pay school property tax? Oh no, that's couldn't do that. And dry cleaning. Boy, gosh. And swimming pool services. I mean, you know, we're really, that's awful. Now, but here are the ones that are serious, and this is really important. The shopping center operators, the outlet operators, the people on the border who cater to the out-of-staters. Down in our area, the Hanover outlets, for example, like to dangle the tax-free clothing and so forth to people who live in Maryland. And they think that's a big deal. Maryland's tax just got bumped up. They lose no business because of the sales tax. 37 states in the union tax food and clothing. Their residents don't go crying and moaning because they have to pay a few extra dollars of sales tax on their candy bars and potato chips. The thing that's magic about it, I hate to use that word, but what's magic about it is that it lets us make the choice. If we have a consumption-based tax, then we consume and we pay tax on it. Conceptually, if that doesn't make sense, we might as well adjourn the meeting, because we have to finance our education. There's no question about that. But I think those of us that look at this issue have to be separated from the politics of it. We've got to look at the morality of it. Property taxes are flat out wrong. They are wrong. They're confiscatory. They take away our hard-earned savings, and they restrict our freedom. What Mike read earlier in the state constitution is even stronger than the federal constitution when it comes to property rights. Pennsylvania trumps the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The original wording was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, but it got changed. Right? Ours didn't.
Right.
Ours is still property-oriented. Why is that? Property is freedom.
Exactly.
And if the 912ers don't stand for, and the Tea Partiers, and I hope the Republicans don't stand for anything, we've got to stand for freedom.
My name is Susan Emmerich, and I'm representing a more down-home aspect of this bill. I've been in real estate about 14 years. I'm with RE/MAX of Lebanon County. I do that full-time. How would elimination of school property tax affect the housing market? As you know, we are in a slump. It's very hard. If you know anybody trying to sell their house, it's very tough. We have the hardest hit people with the property tax are the seniors. It is absolutely immoral that Greenville should get kicked out of her house because she can't afford to pay the school property tax. The other people that are hit really hard are the first-time home buyers. We have all those houses out there, but people, when they go for a mortgage, it's made up of 4 parts: PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. If we would eliminate $2,000 to $10,000 worth of property tax a year, not only can more people afford the pleasure and responsibility of owning their own home, but they can also afford more. For every $1,000 that is paid per year in school taxes, that translates into $20,000 increase in your mortgage, so you can afford to buy more of a home. I think it's time that we make a change. I think this is the time. Let's all stand up. It's not going to be easy, but it's a moral thing to do. It definitely would help the housing industry, and also it helps to even the playing field. In particular, cities, regardless of where you live. Lebanon City is the city in Lebanon County. The taxes are always higher in the cities because they have more services or whatever, but the schools are more expensive too. So if you get rid of that, people like myself who love older houses, and Lebanon City has some beautiful older houses, but they can't sell them because of the taxes. It's cheaper to move elsewhere, pay the same amount of money where you're not paying the taxes. So it evens the playing field, and it would help revitalize Lebanon City also. So that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
My name is David Baldinger. I run a group called the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition, which is a web and email-based taxpayer group that is focused strictly on this issue. And like Joel, I am also one of the leaders of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. Fighting for property tax elimination has been my full-time unpaid job since 2004. I strongly believe in what we're trying to do here. I believe in what it will do for the homeowners of Pennsylvania and for Pennsylvania's economy in general. I might mention the Pennsylvania Coalition of Taxpayer Associations. There's 71 taxpayer groups from across the state who all support this legislation, and the Lebanon 912 group is obviously part of our group. But what is unique about House Bill 1776 and Senate Bill 1400, and we have it in both chambers this time, first time that's ever happened, what is unique about it is that from the get-go, this bill was crafted cooperatively between members of the legislature, particularly Representative Cox, and representatives of our taxpayers groups. We have had full input into the bill. The bill has been written in such a way that it benefits the taxpayers, the homeowners of Pennsylvania. There's nothing in it for the special interests and nothing in it for the politicians. And we're kind of proud of that because very rarely do you see legislation coming out of Harrisburg that has this kind of grassroots taxpayer involvement. That's all I have to say, and Representative Cox has something to add?
I had been on Representative Rohr's staff back in 2003, 4, 5, all of the earlier renditions of this type of approach. I had kind of seen the drafting of them. As we tried to work through things, I saw how the drafting was done, and when I say that, I did the actual language, but I never saw the inner workings of how the bill came together, other than a handful of individuals that I continued to see come into Representative Rohr's office. And so there was a lot of input from some individuals who had some expertise. And so David and I sat down and said, okay, how can we do things to make sure we address as many problems as we can? And that was back in November, December of 2010. As soon as I got reelected, I reserved House Bill 1776. I knew that's what I wanted. I had no idea I was going to call it the Property Tax Independence Act, but I knew that I wanted to do something with freedom, independence, and it is the freedom and the independence of home ownership. Everything kind of developed as it went, but David and I, we started then and we said, here are the two tracks. There's a court of public opinion, and then there's the people who are casting the votes in Harrisburg. And very early on, we knew that we couldn't tie those too closely together because there's nothing worse than a constituent contacting a representative or a senator saying, support this, support this, support this, and there's not a lot of detail out there, and there's not a lot of consensus, and there's not been any discussion beforehand. Very often, legislation will be crafted, it'll be introduced, and then lobbyists, sometimes in the form of constituents, who I feel are the best lobbyists, but very often special interest groups will come and say, hey, this is the bill we want you to support and here's why. And they'll do the educating as far as why a senator or representative needs to come on board with it. We had seen that approach tried on this particular bill in the past. We had seen it fail. And so we knew we had to try something different. And so we brainstormed. I mean, it had to be 4 or 5 hours that first day. It seems like every time we get together to powwow, it becomes a marathon session because we keep coming up with ideas and how to move things along. But David has literally made this entire thing possible because as he's been working the Court of Public Opinion, building those 32 taxpayer groups, I don't know if he mentioned that before I got here or somebody mentioned it. Last year, this time, there were about 32 taxpayer groups. We're now at 71. This man has done his job, and absolutely. Meanwhile, I was looking at how can I gain support within the House? How can we gain support in the General Assembly where the votes are going to be cast? Because it doesn't matter if 9 million out of 12 million Pennsylvanians want it. If the representatives and the senators don't hear from them and aren't connected with it and they don't come on board with it, it'll fail. And so I knew that we needed to have a strong presence on the bill when we first came into it. And so my goal was to build a combination of knowledge about the bill, knowledge about what we were doing, and also do some relationship building, because sometimes you sign on to a bill just because you trust the person that you've worked with. Senator Fulmer was with me on this. But part of the battle there was trying to make sure we had the numbers that were the most recent from the governor's budget, but also, as I got closer to introduction, people suddenly came out of the woodwork saying, are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? How is this being handled? And so the interest level, as I started saying, I'm going to introduce within the next month, people came in and said, can we work this in? Can we work this in? And so we got a lot of good suggestions that actually garnered me additional, two or three of the last changes I made brought on no fewer than 9 co-sponsors.
Wow.
Just in making some simple changes in that 11th hour, if you will. So I felt it was worth it, and I hope you guys do too. But we entered the bill with 60 co-sponsors, 43 Republicans and 17 Democrats. Since the introduction of the bill, we added another Republican out of Delaware County, I guess it was. And so we're up to 61 co-sponsors. I'm optimistic about everything, but that's kind of the lay of the land and my role in it and how we got to this point.
And if I may add to that, the Senate bill is introduced with 13 co-sponsors, and that would be 8 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So we have good bipartisan support on this bill, which is something we have never seen in previous versions.
Okay, what we want to do is address some of the criticisms. Some of it's already been addressed, but I want to go into a couple of things specifically. Perhaps my favorite criticism of the bill, I think it's the most ridiculous criticism, but you hear it. The bill is a shell game. Look, public education is going to have to be funded, so yeah, it's a shell game. We're going to move how we're doing it. Can you address the current system of education funding contrasted to what is provided for in this bill? And that's for anyone.
Let me take that on to start with. As a standing school board member, I can tell you that the funding formula not only is unconstitutional, it's unmanageable. You can take a look just in our county, and I think you'll see the same thing here in Lebanon County. I know you'll see it in Pittsburgh and across the state. We have 16 school districts in York County. The city district receives 65% of its funding from the state, and yet it's got a property tax rate that's about to get jumped 17%. Now, how that's even possible under the Act 1 limits is beyond me. A 17% increase in those taxes still leaves them with a $20 million deficit. That's what we face. Now, how did that happen? First, we chased kids out of the system by dangling charter school. Now, you say, well, Joel, you said you're a conservative and all that. Don't you believe in school choice? Of course I do. But let's have a system that's rational. Let's not bankrupt the public system so that we can funnel kids into a charter school. And then let's look at the performance and make sure that the charters are actually providing the education that we're paying them to provide. Another topic. But that complicates the funding formula. The state right now, I think Rod's numbers were good as far as the number of students. The public education budget's around $26 billion, give or take. That's it's
actually close to $27 billion.
A little over $14,000 per student across the state. In York County, the numbers range from about $13,000 to $17,000. So the average is about representative. Our local Catholic high school can educate a child for $6,800. And they kick our ass on the SATs every year. They have better discipline in the schools. Of course, they're Christ-centered. And if that offends you, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry. They understand. And I'm not trying to say that we should compete on those kinds of grounds. I'm saying that economically, we're getting it handed to us. The second thing I'd like to point out is that funding formula hasn't really fundamentally changed since 1991.
That's right.
The head count was established in the 1991-92 school year. The hold harmless, if you've heard that term, was established in that school year. That means that districts such as Pittsburgh and up along the northern tier and so forth, with declining populations, get more money today than they did then. That means their property taxes, as a percentage of the total funding, could go down. In some cases, it actually hasn't gone down, but the money's been spent. Pittsburgh spends $20,000 per student, and they have some of the worst performance in the entire nation, not just in the state, in the entire country. Their school system is a shambles. They have 1 or 2 shining stars. The rest of it's a waste of money. Philadelphia, terrible performance from an educational standpoint, but economically they're a whole lot better than Pittsburgh because they only waste about $11,000 a kid. of which about 80% comes from the state. Chester Upland's in bankruptcy. 200 school districts in the state right now are in economic distress because the funding formula, which is supposed to be thorough and efficient, is neither. Our children are not being educated. The school districts are spending money on personnel, and they're not spending it where it needs to be spent. We heard some discussions about the pension plan or the pension problems. Our school district, like most, is under an Act 1 cap. We cannot raise those taxes. So luckily, some of the distress that was talked about earlier really has been taken away from us by legislation. But here's what's happening. Up come the salaries against that cap, and then what happens? In our case, and I think the numbers would bear out here too, I said this last night in the school board meeting, for every $100,000 that expense line goes above our revenues, you get to scratch a teacher. That's what's happening. We're taking the public school system apart one teacher at a time. This is not an anti-union diatribe, it's not an anti-teacher diatribe. We are supposed to provide education for the entire Commonwealth. It's not supposed to be a district-funded system. It's supposed to be a state-funded system. HB 1776 gives us state funding. It does something else. It gets us to think about funding children instead of funding programs, pension programs, raises, new buildings, all of those kinds of things. As a result of that, we can start thinking about allocating money by the student. As we start to move forward, we can get away from this disparity. Lower Merion spends $30,000 a student to educate their children. They have $100 million in brand new debt for high schools. That's not thorough and efficient. Hollidaysburg spends $9,000 per student, and their PSSAs are only that much different from Lower Merion. What are they doing differently? How in the world can we support that and call ourselves a Commonwealth? We need guys like Jim and Mike to take these issues and ram them down the throats of their colleagues so that they understand that the state must reform to survive. All of us love Pennsylvania. That's why we're here. And every year when those property tax bills come, we look at them and say, by God, this is the last time I'm doing this. Right? And here we are again. We, I think, finally have hope. This is the closest we've been in 10 years to something that's rational, it's enforceable, it's reasonable. Yes, it's change. But folks, if you'll tell your friends and neighbors, if you'll tell the congregations in your churches, if you'll write letters to the editor, we'll get this done.
If I may add something to what Joel said. Joel talked about the 1991 funding formula. Looking at it on the local level, we are using a tax system that actually originated in the Middle Ages and was adopted in Pennsylvania in the early 1800s as a proxy for income, because there was no reason to report income at that time. There was no law to do it. So you looked at the farmer who was farming 40 acres, assuming he was making more money than the farmer who was farming 10 acres. And that was, I guess, an equitable way at the time to fund education. We're still paying property taxes as if our property generates revenue. It doesn't. Very few of us earn our livings from our property. Why are we still being taxed as if we do? Besides that, the system is so arbitrary and unfair. Well, let's see, you have 10 windows and you have 8. We're going to charge you more because you have more windows. You have a bigger deck than your neighbor, so you're going to pay more. What kind of system is that? It's totally arbitrary. It's subjective depending on the assessor. It's just totally unfair. And what you asked for, Jim, was what we're talking about now. How many of you are familiar with the plan we're talking about tonight? Okay, so there's a few of you. What we're looking at doing is over 2 years. First year free, second year totally eliminate the school property tax in Pennsylvania, to be funded by an increase in the sales tax from 6 to 7%, broadening the base of taxable items subject to the sales tax, with exclusions for home heating, fuel, medical care, a number of others that we feel should not be taxed, and an increase in the personal income tax from 3.07 to 4.01%. That's the basic funding. What it does is takes the onus off the back of the homeowners, roughly 3.2 million homeowners in Pennsylvania, and helps 12.7 million residents plus visitors pay for education. Everybody pays a little bit into the system instead of a few people paying a lot. The plan absolutely makes sense, and it's something that should have been done a long time ago, and Joel touched on this. It's not going to get done without grassroots support. I've been told that by legislators in Harrisburg time and time again. There is so much resistance, so much institutional resistance to this kind of change that it's going to take our voices to get it done. We've raised our voices very loudly in the past 2 years. It's only going to get louder as this bill progresses through the House. But we need you folks to help us, to let your legislators know that this is what you want no matter what. And let your friends and neighbors and relatives from other parts of the state know about this, learn about it, and support the bill.
Fairly early on, we sat down with the various leaders around the Commonwealth and we said, how can we do this? And it was kind of a how to talk to your legislator 101 type approach. I had been in and around the legislature since 1998 as a staff member, and at that point I had been a legislative member for about 4 years. And so I had made some observations as to, what I saw people respond to and what I saw people not respond to. Bring them onto your page, let them know how it can work.
I'm going to take a little more of and I agree with Jim. I mean, you always can attract more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. I mean, there's a biblical statement that says that we need to be as wise as a serpent, but as innocent as a dove as we move forward in these debates. But I'm going to bring some cynicism into this right now. And it's something that I've seen in the last 5.5 years, 6 years now that I've been in office. And what I'm seeing is that we've gravitated to this position of, rather than doing that which is right for everyone as a whole, moving forward with this bill is, by the way, this bill is a education reform bill in all essence, in this foundation, in its very essence, is an education reform bill. My cynicism is that we're more worried about protecting our majorities in our caucuses than we are about doing that which is right. And that is my biggest concern, because that came to me on numerous times. We did bills at the end of the Rendell administration that we didn't have to do. They were pro-labor, anti-small business. I couldn't understand why our caucus was moving a bill for an outgoing administration. And we moved the bill. So I went to my leadership and I said, why are we moving these bills? I thought we were pro-business. I thought we were a small business person. And they go, Mike, it takes money to keep the majority. The bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, the contributions to the HRC and the SRCC is very important, and the re-elects are very, very important. And why we do need to be with kid clubs, and I understand that, Jim, I do. I mean, you don't want to go in there and want to pound a guy off the back, give them an opportunity, explain to them. Then if they don't listen, then you carry the big stick. But anyway, I just want you to be aware of the inside ball game that's there. And I want to vote on this. I want to separate the goats from the sheep. I want to know who exactly is for property tax elimination and who's not, because I'm sick and tired of my fellow members hiding behind our leadership, hiding them behind, because those are called the hard votes, and Jim, I think you know what I'm talking about. They try to protect us from the hard votes because they want to keep the majority. I'm tired of that. I want to know where we stand. I want to know where the wheat is separated from the chaff. That's what I want done, because that's the only way we're going to get this thing finished. Then we know who we got to get rid of. Then we know who's on our side. But until we get a vote, and I need your help to get this done, because, folks, there is going to be wailing and gnashing of teeth like you've never heard. You will think that the world's going to come to the end. We're going to have, oh my goodness, how are we going to fund our schools? How are we going to do this? You're going to have to pay more for a haircut. You're going to pay for, you're going to hear every special interest group rear up its ugly head. The bottom line is, folks, very good people worked very, very hard and took their patience to put together which I think, while no bill may be perfect, I think is as close as we can gonna get on an issue that's very, very important. And again, like I said, this is an educational reform bill. This is more than just eliminating our property tax, school property taxes. This is going to be addressing the unfair funding formulas.
It's economic development.
It's exactly. Joel has he nailed every point on the head, and he was right on each one of those points. So we're going to need your help, and we're going to need thousands and thousands of others, because I'm telling you, I've seen it before. They will be up there, and they will be wailing away at our members. And we're going to have to go, and Jim and I are going to have to be like cheerleaders. And we're going to have to go, buck up, man, we're okay. We're going to be all right. Don't worry about it. We'll be all right. We're on the side of right. You're going to be okay. We're going to have to do that. So the battle is there. This is a good bill, folks. This is a real good bill, and so forth. So I'm going to shut up.
It's a proven fact that as few as 10 contacts from constituents can make a legislator rethink his position on an issue. If you're going to contact a legislator and list some neighbors and relatives to do it as well, it can make a big difference.
It does. They pay attention. They pay attention. I'm telling you, they do pay attention to that. And the more that they get heard, the more they get heard from you folks, the better it is.
I'd like to tweak that statement just a touch,
Yeah.
and I'm going to add to it. They listen to it if it is from an individual. Anybody can take an email, cut and paste, and plop it in and send it out.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails
Make it
on
personal.
any given issue. Teachers Union is very efficient at this, and I'll get emails from all over the Commonwealth regarding education funding and everything else. I have this neat little button on my keyboard. It's got DEL on it, and I've learned that it makes emails disappear from constituents that are outside my district.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But if it's personalized, if you
Yes.
tell your story, here's my property tax level, here's what's
Amen.
going to happen to me, here's why I can't retire, here's how this is impacting my family budget, here's why my husband can't retire even though he's 5 years beyond retirement age and he should be able to retire. He's got to continue working to pay property taxes. Tell your story. That's what connects with the legislators. Blast emails and blast, copy letters. It's impressive to get a lot of those, but it's even more impressive to get 10 heartfelt letters that really explain your scenario.
Let's move on here. We have one question. What if other issues get attached to this bill that are outside the property tax realm? What do we do?
That's something that, again, it's the grassroots. Mike touched on it. We have to stick together, not just on the whining that you're going to hear about, oh no, you're going to tax my personal health care products, you're going to tax my toothbrushes, you're going to tax my deodorant. You name it, there's going to be somebody complaining and saying, and for those of us who have opponents coming into the fall, I'm probably going to have mailers going out against me saying that I want to tax
Yes.
funerals and some of the other members who've been through this process under when Sam Rohr had it. The process goes something like this. Jim Cox wants to tax, or Mike Fulmer wants to tax. Mike doesn't have a race this time, so you're a
But
fortunate one this time
it's going to
around.
come.
But it will come.
It will come. They'll say, well, I'm a tax and spend guy. That's what I'm going to be.
And the focus of the mailers will be simple, and it won't be a lie, because I do, in fact, want to tax your non-prescription medicines. I want to tax your Tylenol. However, they'll leave out the other side of the coin, which is I also want to eliminate your school property taxes as a trade-off for those other items we're going to tax. But they will take every possible egregious thing that sounds horrible. I want to tax your water. I want to tax your food. All of that's true. Consider the trade-off. No property taxes. So that's the number one battle I see. Things are going to get attached on there to say we need to exempt this, we need to exempt that, we need to exempt burial vaults, we need to exempt caskets. All of those, they're heartstring tugs, and that's what we'll go after first. But they will try to put an amendment in that says that is no longer taxable under this legislation. That's the most likely starting point. I purposefully did not put a funding formula in. I've seen a lot of the discussion going on, and I was showing David an article here earlier. Secretary Tomales from the Department of Education has made statements that I fully agree with. He has said the hold harmless way of funding education is on its way out. I'm encouraged to hear discussions like that. House members are becoming irate about how their district is continually underfunded as it's growing, while districts out in the West, as our population and our census numbers attest to,
Exactly.
they're losing population, and yet we're continuing to fund them at the same level. It makes no sense. So the tide is shifting, and more members are becoming upset with the hold harmless. I foresee somebody grabbing some sort of funding formula, whether it's the hold harmless concept, whether it's another pie-in-the-sky funding formula. I foresee that being attached to this and saying, we have to have a way to fund our schools. I'm going to fight adamantly to keep that out of this and keep this as we're changing one source of revenue for another. We're making an unfair tax system. We're swapping it for a more fair tax structure. This is about generating revenue, nothing else. We will fix the funding formula. And I'm giving my commitment to those who express concern to it, but this is not the bill to do it in. And so we're going to need our 61 co-sponsors to stay strong, and anybody else who begins to come on and show support for it. Mike's going to need people in the Senate to stay strong. And he said, we're going to be cheerleaders to say, don't vote for that amendment. Don't let it tug at your heartstrings to put, caskets back in the non-taxable category. We need to maintain the revenue structure. Otherwise, it falls apart, and we've got something that just won't work.
For about every $1,000 you pay in property taxes, for you to be a net loser, you would have to spend over $16,000 of items, newly bought items, taxed at about 7%. So if your tax bill is around $3,500, you'd have to spend about $50,000 in taxable items at 7% for you to be a net loser.
Yeah.
Newly taxed items for that year.
People have said, and the reason we looked at it this way is because when you tax food, immediately, that's one of the first things you hear. Oh, they want to tax food. They're the meanies. We're not taxing the food you need to live on. If you want to go out and buy Twinkies and you think you can live on that, then yes, we're going to tax it, and it should be taxed. But if you're going to buy food to provide for your family, put nutritional stuff on the plates of your children, it won't be taxed. So if you're buying these types of goods, your food budget's not going to change. If you're buying some of the extras, you're going to see a little bit of a change. I would not be opposed to finding a fresh meat type amendment to this, because we all know we need protein and things like that. But we started with this as a great starting point because it took the decision making out of our hands, and we said it's already been adopted by the USDA. Pennsylvania uses it. Let's back out of the decision making process there and use something that makes sense.
Had this legislation been passed in 2006 or 2007, we would have had the most massive spending control in public education you could imagine. The growth in public education spending has been 2 to 3 times the inflation rate for years and years and years. If we had been able to put this in place in 2006 or 7, we'd be spending $7 billion less today than we are. That's cost control. So if you want to get serious about it, this is the way to do it.
To simplify it, the cost of educating, at least the replacement of the property tax revenue, cannot increase faster than the rate of inflation. So if inflation is at 2%, funding to the schools will not increase more than 2%. That's the cost controls built into it, and really the way it should be, considering we've seen historically 6.25% as the rate of increase in property taxes. No reason why they should increase greater than the cost of inflation, or why the schools should be funded greater than the cost of inflation. So that's the mechanism.
And when David's referencing that cost of living adjustment, that inflationary index, this is not an ongoing formula. That is for the first cycle. We take the 2012, 2013 property tax level that they would have been at, and we allow them to grow for that 1 year only at the rate of inflation, or at the level that the level that the sales and income tax comes in. If sales and income tax level comes in higher than the inflationary index, they only grow at the inflationary index level. If the sales and income tax revenues come in at a level less than the inflationary index, which the two pretty much go hand in hand, so that's not likely to happen. But if for whatever reason it comes in a little bit lower, it will be at that lower level. So we take the lower of the two funding levels, and that's the extent of the funding formula that we use. It is a one-time snapshot to provide the funding while we as a legislature come up with that long-term funding formula and how to drive the money out to individuals. I'd love to see it done, as the Corbett administration is attempting to do, shift it more toward a funding following the student type approach. We've got, and Joel said it earlier, why is a $9,000 education accomplishing almost as much as a $28,000 education in Lower Merion? Why the disparity there? Let's treat every child the same and give every child the same opportunity for success. Figure out what was the school district, the $9,000 school district?
Hollidaysburg.
figure out what Hollidaysburg is doing right and push that out to the other schools. That's not going to be done in this bill, but that works hand in hand as a long-term funding formula.
It does, and that's why your bill's so important, Jim, because it lays a foundation out.
And we're only doing what's absolutely necessary in the revenue swap. I wanted to touch on, Tom Corbett has made the statement, and when you said it, it was the first thing that came to my mind. We've got to get spending under control. We are taking the blank checkbook away from the school districts. Imagine the negotiating power a school board will finally have when the teachers union is sitting across the table, fairly bargaining with them, and saying, here are our demands. They can no longer say, just raise your property taxes. They can't do it anymore. I had a group of probably 6 individuals in my office. A few of them were realtors, and this was just this afternoon. You know what school districts, one of my school districts, Wilson School Districts, a school district in Berks County, they have had property tax assessment appeals by businesses in the district. They've lost property tax revenue because those property tax levels have dwindled under the appeals. Where do they go? They're doing what's called a business privilege tax. The school district is doing a business privilege tax. It's going to become a fad in school districts, I think, because it's under the radar. You're not going to be screaming about your property taxes, but your businesses in your community are going to be squeezed because not only are they taking this business privilege tax and saying you have to pay what you earned last year, what Wilson has done, they've said, you know what, we're going to tax you on what you're going to make. We want you to pay a full year estimated tax on what your business is going to earn. And so that's how they're doing a stealth attack on your community, but it's not landing, in your face of the resident. It's going to come through your businesses. That's the next wave in how school districts are going to go after funding. And so we take the blank check away in this area. We're going to, Mike and I are going to be working on these other business tax issues, but we have got to take the checkbook away on a lot of levels so that they don't continue to reach out and grab money from anybody that's got anything in their pocket.
What does this do to help farmers with their property?
I'll just address that quickly, and David and Jim and Joel can jump in. We talk about farmland preservation and such, and we spend a lot of money in doing so. We spend taxpayers' money to preserve farmland, and we want to preserve farmland, but a lot of times when that farmland gets preserved, it doesn't really get farmed. It just stays open space, and that's not creating new wealth. Anything that farmers do is actually it's a new sun natural resource that is created from the soil, which is we're bringing money to the table. And so when you smell that cow manure, it's the smell of money, is what you're actually smelling. And so, and this will help farmers be profitable. The best way to have farmland preserved is to allow farmers to be profitable. They will stay on their farms. The average age of our farmers right now are hitting around age 57. And the children aren't following suit. And I don't know a lot about you folks, but I like eating 3 times a day. And I love the products that they produce. So this bill, in all fairness, will help them stay on their farms. This is their land. This is what they've done. They've worked their soul. That's what it's American, man. I mean, it goes back to 1776. So,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. From a real estate standpoint, no longer with this bill will farmers have to sell off a piece of land just to pay their taxes.
Amen.
They'll be able to stay on their land. And they won't have to, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but the farm preservation and so forth, I think will become obsolete.
Sure.
Because there won't be
We won't
any
need it.
need
No
for
need
this
for it.
anymore.
And there's money, tax dollars that we could shift into, hey, guess what? Safer roads and bridges, whatever.
So somebody explained to me how they can take my tax money and pay a farmer not to develop.
That's a good point.
How do you get away with that constitutionally, to take tax money from one person to take care of another? Makes no sense to me.
Rod, if you use the Constitution the way a lot of legislators do, this is how it's done.
If I can mention one more thing about the farms. What was said about, there goes another piece of the farm, is no joke.
Yes.
Agriculture is the #1 industry in Pennsylvania. And by allowing the farmers to sell off their land just to meet property taxes, we are killing the largest industry in our state and ruining our economy.
Jim, can I add one thing that also was brought to my attention? We have a, Mike touched on it earlier, we have an inheritance tax.
Yes.
Called it the death tax. The family farm suffers from that in a much larger way than you can possibly imagine. They will sell off because when a father passes it on to his son, it's not just he gets the property and he gets to carry on. They find out about it and it's taxed at 4.5%. So if they have a sizable property tax bill, a sizable level of assets, if you will, that's being passed on to them, if they don't have all their ducks in a row and it passes in such a way that they have to pay taxes on it, which most family farms find themselves in, some family farms form legal partnerships, and so they are able to pass on without tax consequences. But by and large, they're being slammed with 4.5% just to pass it from a father to a son. And that's in the instance where you actually have a father-son scenario.
Yeah.
You could have a neighbor that would like it, and they could have been friends for 60 years. He can't even give him a portion of his land without a huge tax being incurred on it.
And here's another thing that we have to understand something. You know, we're talking about liberty and we're talking about freedom. And I love, Jim, the fact that you were able to reserve 1776, and underneath the one printout that you were handing out to legislators, you have liberty, equality, and prosperity. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, it describes everything that bill actually is doing. But here's something you have to understand. When you look at property taxes and inheritance taxes, those were all things that were part of the Communist Manifesto. I just go to the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels, go to it, and it's right there. The attack on property and the attack on inheritances was all about controlled property and controlled populations. So this is truly about a freedom issue, as Joel so eloquently pointed out in his opening statement. And please remember that. Just go to the Communist Manifesto. It's right there. They're two of the main planks, property taxes and inheritance taxes. And this will deal with that emphatically.
Okay, we're going to have to end that there.